Chapter 3 of The Rejuvenation of Aunt Mary by Ann Warner. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3 Introducing Jack. It has been previously stated that Aunt Mary's nephew, Jack, was a scapegrace, and as delightful as scapegraces generally are. It goes without saying that he was good-looking, and of course he must have been jolly and pleasant, or he wouldn't have been so popular. As a matter of fact, Jack was very good-looking, unusually jolly, and uncommonly popular. He was one of the best-liked men in each of the colleges which he had attended. There was something so winning about his smile and his eternal good humor that no one ever tried to dislike him, and if anyone ever had tried, he or she would not have succeeded for very long. It is probably very unfortunate that the world is so full of this type of young man, but that which should cause us all to have infinite patience with them is the reflection of how much more unfortunate it would be if they were suddenly eliminated from the general scheme of things. Like all college boys, Jack had a chum. The chum was Robert Burnett, another charming young fellow of 21, whose education had been so cosmopolitan in design and so patriotic in practice that he always said "Sacre bleu" and "Donnerwetter" when he thought of it, and "Great Scott" when he didn't. He and Jack were as congenial a pair as ever existed, and they had just about as much in common as the aunt of the one and the father of the other had had to pay for. In the February of the year of which I write, Washington, celebrating his birthday as usual, gave all American students their usual chance to celebrate with him. Celebrations were temptations incarnate to Jack, and he was feeling frowningly what a clog Aunt Mary's latest epistle was upon his joys, when his friend came to the rescue with an invitation to spend the double holiday (it doubled that year, Sunday, you know) at the brand new ancestral castle which Burnett père had just finished building for his descendants. It may be imagined that Jack accepted the invitation with alacrity, and that his never very downcast heart bounded gleefully higher than usual over the prospect of 2 days of pleasure in the country. It is not necessary to state where the castle of the Burnetts was erected, but it was in a beautiful region, and the monthly magazines had written it up and called it an architectural triumph. The owner fully agreed with the monthly magazines, and his pride found vent in a housewarming which filled every guest chamber in the place. The festivities were in full swing before the youngest son and his friend arrived, and when the dog-cart, which brought them from the station, drew up under the mighty porte-cochere with its 4 stone lions, rampant in 4 different directions, Jack felt one of those delicious thrills which run through one under particularly hopeful and buoyant circumstances. "It's like walking in a novel," his friend said, as they entered under some heavy draperies which the footman pushed aside and found a tiny spiral staircase which wound its way aloft in a style that Jack liked immensely, and the latter agreed with all his heart. The staircase led them to the 3rd floor, and when they emerged therefrom, they found themselves in a big semicircular billiard room, with a fireplace at each end large enough to put one of the tables in, and cues and counters and stools and divans and smoking utensils sufficient for a regiment. "I tell you this is the way to do things," exclaimed Burnett. "Isn't it jolly? Time of your life, old man, time of your life. And oh, by the way," he said, suddenly interrupting himself, "I wonder if my sister's got here yet." "Which sister?" Jack inquired, for his friend was one of a very large family, and he had met several of them on their various visits to town. "Betty, the one who beats all the others hollow." But just there the conversation was broken off by the servants coming up with the luggage, and setting 2 doors open that showed them 2 big rooms, both exquisitely furnished, and both with windows that looked out, first onto a stone balustrade, and secondly to a superb view over the river and the mountains beyond. The men unstrapped the things and went away, leaving such a plenitude of comfort behind them as led Jack to fling himself into the most luxurious chair in the room and stretch his arms and legs far and wide in utter contentment. Burnett was fishing for his key ring. "It's a great old place, isn't it?" he remarked parenthetically. "Great Scott, but I'll bet we have fun these 2 days. And if my sister Betty is here—" He paused expressively. "Doesn't she live at home?" Jack asked. "She's just come home. She's been in England for 3 years. But I tell you she's a corker." "I should think—" The sentence was never completed because a voice without the not altogether closed door cried, "No, don't think, please. Let me come in instead." And in the same instant Burnett made one leap and flung the door open, crying as he did so, "Betty!" Then Jack, bunching somewhat his starfish attitude, looked across the room and realized instantly that it was all up with him forever after. Because she who stood there in the door was quite the sweetest, the loveliest, the most interesting looking girl whom he had ever laid eyes on. And when she was seized in her brother's arms, and kissed by her brother's lips, and dragged by her brother's hands well into the room, she proved to be 1,000 times more irresistible than at first. "I say, Betty, you're absolutely prettier than ever," her brother exclaimed, holding her a little off from him and surveying her critically, and then he seemed to remember his friend's existence, and, turning toward him, announced proudly, "My sister Bertha." Jack was standing up now, and thinking how lovely her eyes were just at that instant when they were meeting his for the first time, thinking much else too. Thinking that Monday was only 2 days away, hang it! Thinking that such a smile was never known before. Thinking that he had years ahead at college. Thinking that the curl on her forehead was simply distracting, whereas all other light curls were horrid. Thinking that he might cut college and— "My chum, Jack Denham," Burnett continued, proving in the same instant how rapidly the mind may work since his friend had compassed his encyclopedia of sentiment and probability between the 2 halves of a formal introduction. "Oh, I'm very glad to meet you, Mr. Denham," she said, putting out her hand, and he took it and held it just long enough to realize that he really was holding it, before she took it away to keep for her own again. "I've often heard of you, and often wished I might know you." "I'm awfully glad to hear you say that," he said, "and if I should have the royal luck to be next to you at dinner, it doesn't seem to me that I shall have the strength to keep from telling you why." She clapped her hands at this, just as a very little girl might have done. "If that is so, I hope that they will put you next to me at dinner," she said gaily. "But if they don't, you'll tell me some other time, won't you? I'm always so interested in what people have to tell me about myself." Burnett began to laugh. "Jack," he said, "I see that we'd better have a clear and above-board understanding right in the beginning, and so I'll just tell you that this sister of mine, who appears so guileless, is the very worst flirt ever. She looks honest, but she can't tell the truth to save her neck. She means well, but she drives folks to suicide just for fun. She'd do anything for anybody in general, but when it's the case of you individually, she won't do a thing to you. And you must heed my words and be forewarned and forearmed from now on. Mustn't he, Betty?" At this the sister laughed, nodding quite as gaily as if it were a laughing matter instead of the opening move in a possibly serious, tremendously serious game of life. "It's awful to have to subscribe to," she said with dancing eyes, "but I'm afraid it's true. I'm really quite a reprobate, and I admit it frankly. And everyone is so good to me that I never get a chance to reform. And so
"But then I suppose I ought to warn her about you, too," said Burnett, turning suddenly toward his friend. "It isn't fair to show her up and not show you up, you know. And really, Betty, he's almost as bad as you are yourself. I may tell you in strict confidence, for it's only been in a few newspapers, that he hasn't got his breach of promise suit all compromised yet. Ask him to deny it if he can."
The sister looked suddenly startled and curious, and Jack felt himself to be blushing desperately.
"I don't look as if he was lying, do I?" he asked, smiling. "Be honest now, for you can see that Burnett and I both are."
"No, you don't," she said. "You look as if it was a very true bill."
"It is," he said, "and it's going to be an awfully big one, too, I'm afraid."
"I wouldn't have thought you were such a bad man," said the sister ever so sweetly. "But I like bad men. They interest me.
"There, I see your finish," said Burnett. "That's one of her favorite opening plays. It's all up with you, Jack, and your aunt will have to go down for another damage suit when you begin to perceive that you have had enough of our family. But you'll have to get out now, Betty, and let him get dressed for dinner. You needn't cry about it either, for he's even more attractive in his glad rags than he is in his railway dust. My word of honor on it."
"I look nice myself when I'm dinner dressed," said the sister, "so I sympathize with him, and I'll go with pleasure. Good-bye." She sort of backed toward the door, and Jack sprang to open it for her.
"You can kiss her hand if you like," Burnett said kindly. "They do so in Germany, you know. I don't mind, and mamma needn't know."
"May I?" Jack asked her, and then he caught her eye over her brother's bent head, and added, so quickly that there was hardly any break at all between the words, "Some other time?" "Some other time," she said, with a world of meaning in the promise, and then she flashed one wonderful look straight into his eyes and was gone.
"Isn't she great?" Burnett asked, unlocking his suitcase in the most provokingly everyday style, as if this day was an everyday sort of day, and not the beginning and end of all things. "Oh, I tell you, I'm almost dotty over that sister myself." "Do you suppose that I could manage to have her for dinner?" Jack asked, feeling desperately how dull any other place at the table would be now. "I don't know. When I go down to my mother, I'll try to manage it. Shall I?" "I wish you would." "I reckon I can. But, great loads of fire, fellow, don't think you can play tag with her and feel funny at the finish. She'll do you up completely and never turn a hair herself. She's always at it. She don't mean to be cruel, but she's naturally a carnivorous animal. It's her little way." Jack did not look as dismal as he should have done. He smiled and looked out of the window instead. "She'll have to marry someone some day, you know," he said thoughtfully. "Have to marry someone some day!" Burnett cried. "Why, she is married. Didn't you know that?" And he unbuckled the shirt portfolio as he spoke, just as if calamities and tragedies and shooting stars might not follow on the heels of such a simple statement as that last. It was an awful moment, but poor Jack did manage to continue looking out of the window. If any greater demand had been made upon him, he might have sunk beneath the double weight. "No," he said at last, his voice painfully steady. "I didn't know it." Burnett laughed heartlessly, hauling forth his apparel with a refined cruelty which took careful heed of possible interfolded shoes or cravats. "She married an Englishman when she was 19 years old," he said. "That was when they sent me to Eton that little while, until I drove the horse through the drug shop. The time I told you about, don't you know?" "Yes, I remember," said Jack. He observed with sickening distinctness that the night had begun to fall, the river's silver ribbon had become a black snake, and that the mountain range beyond loomed chill and dark and cheerless. "I guess I ought to be getting into my things," he said, moving toward his own door. "There's a bath in here," his friend called after him. "We're to divide it." "Sure," was the reply. It sounded a trifle thick. "I don't think that she ought to," said the brother to himself, as he began to draw out his stick pin before the mirror. "I don't care if she is my favorite sister. I don't think that she ought to." Then he went on to make ready for the securing of his half of the bath, and forthwith forgot his sister and his friend. End of chapter 3.